Hey, Brett, how's it going this week?
Good, Ange. How are you?
Good. Well, that means it's another episode of Money in the Bank, the podcast where we talk about all things related to personal finance. And we are still doing 2 episodes a week. So we're going to continue doing this as long as it's sustainable. So we're hoping for a while, but we'll let you know if we're going to cut back. But until further notice, this will be our new schedule. So Monday and Wednesday.
Woohoo! I know you guys are pumped.
We've been getting really good reception to this. So almost all of our listeners are tuning in to both episodes every week, which is really awesome. And thanks for the support. We appreciate it.
I know. I didn't know so many people like the sound of my voice. So
yeah, it's really all awesome. You, babe. It's all you. And speaking of all being you, are you ready for your trivia question?
The answer is 42. Like whatever the question is, percentage, dollar amounts.
It's a percentage.
All right, 42%.
Okay.
Go. Let's go.
Okay. So what percentage
42
of millionaires in the U.S. are first generation? Meaning that they didn't inherit any of their wealth or most of their wealth.
It's probably not 42%. If I had to guess. 0.42%.
0.42.
4.2.
4.2% of millionaires are first generation.
Sure.
80% of millionaires
are
first
all right,
generation. Should have just gone with your first answer.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
So I read a book a while back called Millionaire Next Door, and it was talking about how it's always the people who you least expect it are the ones who are the millionaires.
That's true. I guess there are a lot more millionaires now, and I always tout that as like this like unattainable goal, right?
No, so I'm not saying 80% of people in the U.S. are millionaires.
No, right. But like there are a lot more. From what I was giving you a number of, I was just thinking like there's like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and like all those guys. Those are the millionaires, not like the guy down the street that just like drives a Honda. Right?
But what I think is interesting about that statistic and what I read in the book is like most people who are millionaires are because they like built this wealth themselves and they are really frugal. No surprise there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people born into wealth or to rich parents, they had this style of living that they were accustomed to in their childhood, and they didn't translate that into like how much their parents worked or how hard their parents worked, or their parents didn't pass on those same lessons of frugality and money. And so when they took over the reins of their financial picture, they just like spent to zero every month and didn't build that wealth back up for themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to see how a lot of generational wealth ends up kind of dying out eventually instead of being the sustainable thing, because it could be, right? Like according to the 4% rule, if you build up this certain pot of money, it could last for a very long time. And that's just not what's happening, because people don't. You have to, and the book talked a lot about it. There was actually a really good chapter on like parenting and how to pass on those values to your kids.
Yeah, because I remember when we were talking about like economics back in high school or something, there's like very few dynasties that exist still today. And I think a dynasty is defined as like 4 generations worth of retention of like that hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean the status. Hiltons.
Yeah,
I think that's like all I've got.
There's several still in China and Europe and stuff, but we don't have very many of those in the United States still, or even the Rockefellers. I don't know where they went, but probably out there being silent billionaires somewhere.
Maybe they're secretly the ones behind that new Bright Line train. They're like, we're coming back for the train industry.
That's the Virgin Atlantic guy.
America's ready for us. Well, and like Warren Buffett was self-made, and actually, maybe Warren Buffett is a good person to start with because I love him. He actually just released an article recently talking about how in the last few years he has not beat the S&P, and basically just told people, like, stop trying to invest your money with, like, high-cost people like me. Just get a low-cost index fund. I think he wants to retire, and he's like, come on, guys, stop investing with me. But Warren Buffett is fascinating because one, not only is he going to give most of his wealth away when he dies, making his kids like make their own fortunes or whatever, but he still lives in the same house that he bought back in like the 50s in Iowa.
Oh, wow.
Like, so talk about not inflating your lifestyle. Like literally one of the world's richest men is like, I'm cool living in this, $50,000 house I bought
fixer-upper
back in 1950. I'm sure it's still a pretty nice house. I think for $50,000, even to this day, you could get a pretty nice house in Iowa.
Sorry, Cornhuskers. No offense.
But I mean, the fact that he could afford like a penthouse anywhere in the world, or, you know, he could really inflate his lifestyle. And the fact that he hasn't is a good lesson. I mean, even Bill Gates, he lives in a very nice house. He has a trampoline room, right? Like, he's a pretty cool baller guy. But he still, like, he built that house in the 90s, and he's never felt the need to, like, upgrade or whatever. So I guess when you nail it with a trampoline room, like, what are you going to upgrade to? Right? But so what I kind of want to talk about today is the whole concept of, like, being rich or flaunting, you know, your wealth and actually being wealthy. Because what that book taught me, and just, like, hearing all these stories about these people who are well off, like, if you met Bill Gates on the sidewalk, it's not like he goes around wearing a tuxedo and a Rolex and, you know, super nice shoes and shows up in, like, the world's nicest car. Well, I don't know what he drives, but, you know, there's a lot of people out there. There was some talk show guy, Jared Leto. What's his name?
Jay Leno?
Jay Leno, that guy. He is the one who, like...
How did I even get that?
He's the one, I believe, who talked about how he's, like, still drove, like, a Toyota for a lot of years because to him, like, he always had, like, a side hustle or side business, and, like, he saved all the money from his main career path and just, like, lived on this, like, little piddly side income.
The guy that owns every classic car known to man? That Jay
Not
Leno?
that one. Who is it then? Some talk show host guy.
Jimmy Fallon.
Maybe. I don't know. No, I don't know. Anyways, there is a
Maury.
guy. We'll figure this out. I'll write
Jerry
it up
Springer.
in my post. Shut up. I don't know. And I think what's really fascinating is if you go around a neighborhood and you pick the nicest house on the block, they're probably not the ones that have the most money in the bank. It's probably if you go down and you find, like, the smallest house on the block with, like, the, you know, Honda Civic parked in front, that's probably going to be your moneymaker.
Right.
That's the one that if you look at their bank account, you say, I want that bank account.
The guy that wears raggedy jeans every day and is always painting his house or doing some kind of construction on his house. Yeah, probably he's got the biggest bank in the neighborhood.
Yeah, the one who duct tapes his shoes because he doesn't want to get rid of them yet and has a hole in the bottom. I'm not talking about myself.
God damn it. I thought you threw those away.
I did not throw them away yet. So, yeah, I think what was really cool reading this book and kind of learning more about it is frugality is just kind of baked into people. And so then they're able to save this money. And what's the point, right? Because money can't buy happiness. I'm willing to admit that. But then my counterpoint to that is then stop trying, right? Because if you're spending all of your money, isn't that trying to buy the happiness more than, like, building up this safety net?
Yeah, and at a certain level, once you've, like, achieved all of, like, your, like, basic hierarchical needs, like, money can solve a lot of happiness problems for, like, people that are poor.
That is
right?
true, yes.
Like, there's a certain, like, threshold where, like, then lifestyle choices, money doesn't buy happiness. But, like, I need to, like, be able to eat and, like, have nice clothes or, like, some clothes that are good and, like, you know, live somewhere, like, and my medical bills need to be paid off because I'm, like, totally underwater. Money's going to solve a lot of those problems.
Absolutely.
And make people pretty happy in that regard, right? So I guess it's more accurate to say money doesn't solve problems, or money does solve problems, just not, like, when you're rich, right?
Well, and I actually looked at a statistic that showed if you make about $70,000 a year, I think per household, so family of 4, not more than that. So if you have, like, 10 kids, sure, you need more money to support all of your offspring. But if you make about $70,000 a year, they've found that, and spend it all, let's say, they found that spending more or making more money than that won't actually make you happier. So, like,
sure,
if you go from 70 to 100 and you spend that extra 30,000 on going out to eat or whatever, or buying a nicer car.
You went to Disney World for 5 minutes.
Yeah, like, that's not going to increase your happiness. So that's more what I'm talking about. Like, if we're talking about building wealth, I think it said in the Millionaire Next Door book, most of the people that they were looking at were making about $100,000 a year for their household. So that could be 2 people making $50,000 a year each, or however you want to dice it.
Mm-hmm.
But that was what they were looking at, and they found, you know, they found people on the end of the spectrum that had, you know, worked for a while and they had saved up over $3 million net worth, and they were able to retire comfortably and live a very nice retirement. And then they found people who were still in debt at that age, making the same amount of money, right? So I guess we're not talking about people living at poverty and yes, I understand that if you could double your salary, it would be a huge difference in your quality of life. But if you are making $100,000 a year and you double your salary, you don't get double the happiness.
Right. That is a more accurate way to represent that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what I wanted to talk about on this episode is I feel like people who come into money, so thinking of like
Hillbillies.
I thought that, okay, yeah, Beverly Hillbillies. Like, that show, wasn't it all about them coming into, like, all this money and then, like, going crazy with it and buying, like, a mansion and...
Yeah. They moved to Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
From Texas. They struck oil and then they moved to Beverly Hills and they didn't, other than buying that house, they really didn't inflate their standard of living.
Okay.
Because they still, like, were, like, straight up hillbillies. That was the point of the show. So they still lived like hillbillies, just in a mansion instead of in a shack in the woods.
So can everyone tell that I don't watch a lot of TV? Like,
this is black and white, a little before your time, little girl.
But my point being that, like, a lot of times when people come into money that maybe didn't grow up with it, or maybe they did grow up with it, we already kind of covered that latter group, but it's easy to be like, oh, well, this is what I'm supposed to do with this money based off of what I see, right? So it's like, I've never made $80,000 a year. So now that I make this extra $10,000, I need to buy this car to keep up with the Joneses, or I deserve a nicer house, right? And what I guess the point of this episode is to talk about the difference between being rich and being wealthy and which one you want to achieve. Because maybe you want to achieve being rich, but my definition of that is you started making, we're just going to go with the book's example of like you're making $100,000 a year, and at the end of the year, you don't have anything to show for that. So, like a few episodes ago when we talked about my, purse mistake, it's not learning that lesson at a young age. And then every year, instead of building your net worth, you're just going back to zero every year. So you have nothing to show for it. You don't know where your money went. You bought all this stuff. You have the nice house, a nice car. But you also waste a lot of money on stupid stuff all the time, right? And if somebody asks you, where is your money going at the end of the year, you probably don't have a good answer for them.
Right, unless you're using something like mint.com and you track all your finances and you pull up a graph and you're like, this is exactly where all my money went, right? Here's a nice little categorized representation of where my money went, right? Most people are like, there's a bunch of crap in my house, I guess, like, but then you don't even know what it is or where it is until you go to move, and then you're just like, where did I get all this stuff? Let me tell you how I know.
Yeah. Or a lot of people in that category also are the same people who complain about like, well, I don't make enough. Or I need to make more money, or like not recognizing, hey, I'm making $100,000 a year. That's like incredible. It's never enough to satisfy their desire, right?
Right. I mean, we've talked to a lot of people that like make over $50,000, $60,000 a year, and they're just like, I'm like dirt poor all the time, and I'm like, you should not be, right? Something's very wrong in your formula. Like you're making enough money to totally live off of, and like do pretty well. If you were setting things up correctly, but then their money just disappears, or they're just like buying crap on Amazon all the time, or
But they're the same people that are like, making 50, 60 grand a year, have no money, and then the next time you see them, they're showing you
their new car.
X, Y, or Z, new object, new car, new cell phone, new gadget, new, whatever, and you're just like, I understand. You don't understand, but I understand, right? Mm-hmm. And it's sad because a lot of it, the issue is that we don't talk enough about personal finance in general. So people just fall into this trap of like working with other high income individuals or living by high income individuals, and it truly becomes not even so much of keeping up with the Joneses, but like you are, right? There's that quote that's like, you are a composition of the 5 people that you spend most of your time with. Right? Mm-hmm. So if like those 5 people are doing these activities of, getting campers or getting boats or whatever, then you buy a boat, and because you want to go boating with them and you want to do the same activities that they're doing. And then all of a sudden you're just like all encouraging each other to go down this downward spiral together.
Right? Like this example right now, like all my like really close friends are all buying like brand new like computers, right? Building brand new systems that are like super expensive. And I'm just like, do I need that? What am I going to do with that? Like, what is my immediate need to like have to be able to build like a, top tier, like gaming rig that's like a couple $1,000s. I'm just like, I'm going to wait and like see what happens there. right?
Well, and I remember you were talking to me about this recently, and I was like, well, if we need to put this in the budget, like, we need to know, so we need to have a plan for it. And I asked you, I was like, is there something that you're trying to do that you can't currently do on your current setup? And I think you told me there was like one game right now that you can't play.
Yeah, somehow. And I don't even have a graphics card, and so like somehow I'm still like from 2016, I'm still using this computer, and it's still able to play like most every game we play together. So,
right.
But like, yeah, just now hitting the cusp, like, 4 years later, of not being able to do something.
Right. And so I was like, well, how important is it to you to play this game yet? And you were like, it's not that important yet, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think you said, like, there were still some known issues with the game or something.
It's super buggy, yeah.
Yeah, like, maybe they're going to fix it, and it will work on your computer. Who knows?
Could get better. But is it worth me going and buying, like, the latest graphics card to, like, future-proof everything? One, that's not a good deal, because you should be buying these when somebody else has like worn down the price, or get something used when somebody else upgrades, and then you get it for a quarter of what the price should be retail. And so maybe we'll look at something like that, and maybe that's the right choice, is to do like a small bunny hat. But I'm not gonna go probably build a whole new like super state of the art VR ready computer when I'm like I don't have any aspiration to necessarily do that right now. Only my friends are like deciding, and they're kind of feeding off of each other to do that and get all that stuff ready to go. And then maybe they will start playing VR together, right? Maybe that's the goal, because I know 2 of them already have headsets to do it out of like 5. And so maybe that is the goal. But then, we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. If like everybody migrates that direction, maybe I get pulled along with me, or maybe I fall off the edge. But that is a kind of a groupthink mentality, where like everybody's putting this stuff together now. One person says they're going to do it, and the next person's like, oh, maybe I should do it too, right?
Right, and it's a slippery slope, and it's actually better just people be like, I'll stay back here and wait and see what happens. And I mean, the other hard thing, especially about the technology, but you could say the same for cars or anything, is like you might buy the latest and greatest now, and then in 5 years it's all going to be outdated anyways.
Sure, it always is.
Yeah. And so like, if you can make your 3-year-old computer or 3-year-old car last another 3 years and then upgrade, like, that's another feasible option. So, I mean, with phones, with computers, with cars, how long can you make that original item last and get by and then upgrade? Because the more you can space that out, the more you can save in the meantime and hit those doublers that we love to talk about.
That's right. Yeah, the more money, the longer you can put this stuff off when you don't need to have it. No, definitely don't be the early adopter. I used to be the early adopter on like all this stuff, right? Or enthusiast is the other way they call it, right? To always have like the latest and greatest stuff. But when you're paying like 4 times the price, or like max retail value for all this stuff, instead of just like waiting a couple months, you just like throwing that extra margin like away. Other people are getting it for way less than you just because they had a little bit more patience. And what did you get for it at the end of the day, right? Yours just breaks down faster than theirs, right?
Yeah.
Like a new phone, your battery's going to die faster, right? Because you were using it more than everybody else.
Yeah, and so kind of to jump back a little bit, so what does this mean at the end of the day? Well, it means that if you're constantly being the early adopter or the enthusiast, or just buying all this stuff in general, again, at the end of the year, your balance sheet is going to be 0, right? You're going to not have gained anything. You're going to have no surplus. Where if you're more conscious about this stuff and your priorities are shifted, so you're like, no, I'm going to put savings first over, getting a new car, computer, or whatever, then all of a sudden at the end of the year, you're like, okay, great. Out of the $100,000, my surplus, just by being slightly less ridiculous than the average consumer, I am easily able to save 30% of my income, and I have $30,000, right? And like, these numbers might sound kind of silly, but this is like reality. Like, if you're making $100,000, you can choose to spend it all very easily. You can light money on fire in a million different ways every single day. Or you can make the choice to save some of that money every single day and wind up with $30,000 at the end of the year between your 401k and savings account or whatever. And that money can give you power, right? So what I mean by that is, if you do that every year for so many years, you can buy back your life, essentially. You can buy your freedom from the cubicle, right? Or you can not. You can buy your dream lake house, right? You can save up for bigger purchases.
Right, because maybe you're one of those like 100 people that like love what they do, right? And you're not working for the job. You're actually doing everything that you love, and that's a long-term strategy for you. But most people, everybody I talk to and everybody that I ever circulate with in any business that I ever go to can't wait to get out of their job and can't wait to stop working for whoever they work for, right? And so that's, they're not really living. Their life is on loan to these people to continue supporting their lifestyle for as long as they want to continue that lifestyle.
Well, and
until they can dig themselves out of it, right?
I'm somebody who generally likes my job, and I'm not sure, I don't know that I want to quit early for sure, right? Because until you can make that decision, who knows, right? But what I will say is, isn't it worth giving yourself more options? So even if I'm like, I don't know if I want to, retire in my 30s, isn't it great to be financially independent so that I have that option and then decide then? And if I'm like, oh yeah, no, I want to keep working for the next 10 years, then I can live it up. I can become a baller and I can be like, well, I already saved, all this money to be financially independent, so now I can do whatever I want for the rest of my life if I want to keep working. And, or, I also hear all these stories about people who buy a house potentially or, and then they have these big repairs that they weren't planning for. And for me, it's like peace of mind to know, well, I've been a good saver. So if I need a new roof, I get a new roof. And it's not going to cause me to lose sleep at night. And I feel like
a lot of people are worried about, like, they just stress themselves out in their retirement because they don't, what if this big expense happens, right? And they just like hope and pray that like this stuff doesn't happen to them, or like big medical bills don't come up because it'll like destroy their retirement plan. Right, because if you take out $10,000 now, when you're 70, that money is not in the bank to last you until you're 90 to become, that other $30,000 or whatever you needed to get by. So you don't want to have those big expenses happen early because you have no cushion, right? They were just like, okay, we retired when maybe we have enough money, we're not even sure, and turns out they don't really, or they're just on the cusp, and then can't weather any bad situations.
Well, and the other point I want to make about people who are generally wealthy versus people who are, just living big, a lot of times people will be living big, they don't have these savings, and then they're like, something bad happens, whether it's medically or something to their house or whatever. They have this huge expense, and they're like, well, I could have never planned for this, so you should feel bad for me, right? And
set up a GoFundMe, right?
Right. I mean, truly, that happens all the time. And I usually have sympathy in these situations still, but really, people who are wealthy, the difference is they don't plan for these specific things to happen to them. They just plan in general that they might have some loss. Because most people who are building this wealth, they're building it from the ground up. They understand that there's risks in life. Maybe they won't have this income level forever. Maybe they won't have this expense level forever. Maybe something will happen. So they plan to have this like $20 buffer on either side of like, maybe tomorrow I'll lose my job, right? And for some people, it's like, well, I could have never planned to lose my job. So now I have to set up a GoFundMe for expenses for the next 6 months until I get a job again. But the difference is people who are wealthy, you don't plan for any specific thing to happen. You just plan that something bad will likely happen at some point, and I need to have a retainer on hand for it. Because that's not just good personal practice. That's like a business practice, right? Like businesses set up this, they don't know what's going to happen, but they know something might happen. And so they set up this retainer that they have this surplus of money. And people who practice this in their personal lives do better in the long run too, because then no matter what it is that happens to you, it's a little blip in your radar and you just keep chugging along.
Right. And yeah, everybody wealthy people operate their life kind of like it's a business, where like, or a good long-term business, not one that like gets a lot of money and, gets all the revenue in and then just like blows it on employee perks and then they close their doors after 3 years because they didn't have a plan, right? One bad thing, the one customer that they have leaves and then they're like, oh, we didn't plan. What? Oh my gosh, this terrible situation of this one person that we banked all of our faith in, like decided to go with another person and now we don't have any customers. Guess we're gonna have to close, right?
Right.
It's the same thing with your money, right? So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Plan for eventual problems to have happen, but it's a lifestyle choice, right? And it's not just that they plan for that. They plan long-term retirement. They plan, for eventualities, and like maybe they get married, maybe they don't, but they're like still doing these plans anyway. There's like stuff will happen to me for the rest of my life, and like having this more power now, more money now, gives me all the flexibility to take advantage of good opportunities, weather bad things, like you said, right? But rich people are just like, I have money now, and then it just goes away, and then...
Well, yeah, let's talk about like the subprime mortgage crisis for a little bit. So you have person A who is building long-term wealth, and they didn't buy the house at the top end of their budget, and they're able to save an emergency fund because they didn't buy the house at the top of their budget. And, the mortgage crisis happens, and their house value drops in half, but they're like, I'm not even going to look at what my current house price is because I'm just going to keep making the monthly payments. And even if I lose my job, I have an emergency fund to cover 6 months of expenses, we'll say. So I'm going to be okay. And because I didn't buy a house at the top of my budget, if I have to go from making $100,000 to $60,000, I'll still be able to pay for my mortgage and I'll be okay, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that person, and somebody could look at them and be like, well, nothing bad ever happens to you, and you don't understand what it's like to lose your house. But they planned. They're a prepper. We've talked about that before. Like,
they didn't get in over their head for no reason in the first place.
Right. Like, and so then person B, they bought the house at the top end of their budget. And what I mean by that is they bought the house that they said they were approved for. So if you're making $100,000 a year, you could probably get approved for a $500,000 house. Would I ever recommend that you do that? No, right?
I know whole neighborhoods of these people, right?
Right.
Like you can tell every person in the neighborhood, like single income, like the wife doesn't work a lot of the time, or vice versa, right? Depends. And they're probably not as baller as they try and appear to be with their giant house. People, lawn service and everything. Right. Sprinkler system for no reason.
Yeah, giant house with... their giant houses are more expensive. You got to fill them with furniture. You have to maintain it. If you need to replace carpet or paint someday, you're just automatically more expensive.
And then the mortgage crisis came along, and then boom, those people are all upside down on their mortgage. And now they're just like, we don't know what to do.
And they didn't have an emergency fund.
Yeah, they didn't have,
So their house gets foreclosed on. They have to accept bottom of the barrel prices. Any equity they had in the house is immediately gone. Right?
Right. So, you buy this house for, most of them built the house from scratch, right? So built it for $500,000 and sold it for like $250,000 or whatever, right? Just to get out of it, just to get some money back.
And then they're trying to, recoup all this lifestyle, so they're only looking for jobs that pay $100,000 or higher in a shrinking job market. And all of a sudden they're like, well, how come this person down the street with their, cheap house and their emergency fund can find a job and I can't? And it's because that person could find a job at $60,000. And right, when you have a shrinking job market, you're not going to be able to find the high-paying jobs as easily as lower-paying jobs. And so if you only target those high-paying jobs, you're not getting another job. You're not able to recover and rebuild where that person on the street is, right? They're weathering the storm in their small house, just smiling every day, living the dream.
The winner of the supply and demand flipperoo.
That's right. So there's a lot to be said for focusing on long-term wealth instead of short-term gains. And like we always talk about on this podcast, if there's anything you really want in life, go for it, save for it, achieve it, but do it in a smart way. Do it in a long-term way. Don't buy that $500,000 house for your starter home. Buy it when you can truly, comfortably afford it and keep it forever, no matter what happens. Mm-hmm. And that's just the truth, y'all. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in again this week. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, I will drop all of my contact information in. And like we said at the start of this episode, we will continue doing 2 episodes a week for the foreseeable future. And we're excited to be putting out more content for you guys. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys. Yep.